The morning my daughter called to tell me I'd be hosting Christmas dinner for 19 people, I was standing in my kitchen in Fredericton, watching snow come down over the river. It wasn't a question. That's the part I keep coming back to, even now. She didn't say, "Mom, would you be able to?" She said, "So we're doing Christmas at your place this year, and I've already told everyone." 19 people. Her husband's family, her sister-in-law's boyfriend, 2 cousins who hadn't spoken to me in 4 years, and a woman named Brenda, whose connection to the family I still cannot fully explain. I said, "When did we decide this?" She said, "Mom, it's just easier. You have the space." I do have the space. That's true. The house on Douglas Avenue has 4 bedrooms, a dining room with a table that seats 10 if you're friendly about it, and a kitchen I've spent 31 years making functional. I have the space because I worked for it. Because after my husband Raymond passed in 2019, I didn't sell the way everyone thought I should. I stayed. I repainted the front porch myself in October because I couldn't afford to hire anyone, and I wasn't ready to ask my children for help, not after the last time. But my daughter didn't mean the space the way I mean it. She meant square footage. She meant that I was available. She meant that I was the path of least resistance, and she had already sent the group text. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because context matters. My name is June Hartwell, 64 years old, retired dental hygienist, widow, mother of 2 adult children who I love with the whole of myself, even on the days I cannot understand them. My daughter is 38, my son is 35. They are both doing well by any reasonable measure. Good jobs, healthy kids, homes of their own. I did not raise them to be unkind. I don't believe they are unkind, not at their core. But there is a particular blindness that can develop in children who were never allowed to see their parents struggle, and I protected them from that, maybe too well. Raymond and I owned a bakery, Hartwell's, on Queen Street from 1989 until we closed in 2011. 22 years. We made bread and pastries and wedding cakes and the kind of butter tarts that people drove in from Sussex for. We employed 11 people at our peak. We sponsored the minor hockey league 3 years running. We were not wealthy. We were the opposite of wealthy for most of those years, but we were rooted. We were known. There is a difference. My children were in high school when we closed. The economy had shifted. The rent on Queen Street had tripled, and Raymond's back was giving out in ways that couldn't be ignored anymore. We didn't tell them how close things were. We told them we'd made a decision, that it was time for something new, and we kept the rest to ourselves the way parents do, when they believe protection is the same as love. My son took it the hardest, not because he understood what we'd lost, but because Hartwell's had been the backdrop of his whole childhood. The smell of the place, the warmth of the back kitchen on winter mornings, the way Raymond let him shape rolls on Saturday afternoons. He grieved the bakery the way children grieve things, loudly for a while and then not at all. He never asked what it had cost us. Kids rarely do. My daughter adapted immediately. She had always been practical. She moved the story along. After the bakery closed, I went back to dental hygiene. Raymond took a position managing inventory for a building supply company. Work he found humiliating, but did without complaint for 8 years until the diagnosis. Then, it was just me, and the house, and the long recalibration of what my life would look like. I am telling you all of this because I want you to understand that when my daughter called in October to announce Christmas, I didn't say anything sharp. I said, "That's a lot of people for this kitchen." And she said, "You'll figure it out, Mom, you always do." And I said I'd think about it. And she took that as a yes. What followed was 6 weeks of being the silent logistics manager of an event I had not agreed to host. My daughter sent me a shared spreadsheet, color-coded by dietary restriction. There was a column for allergies, a column for preferences, a column marked confirmed with little checkboxes, and a tab at the bottom labeled Mom's budget that I will admit I stared at for a full 2 minutes before I closed the laptop. My son called once in November to ask if I needed help with anything. I said yes, actually. Could he come by the weekend before to help me rearrange the furniture in the dining room and bring up the extra folding table from the basement? He said he'd try. He did not come. I moved the furniture myself on a Tuesday afternoon, resting twice, which I did not tell anyone about. My daughter called 3 times in the 2 weeks before Christmas. The first time was to confirm I'd ordered the turkey. A fresh, free-range, heritage breed turkey, she said, because her husband's mother had a sensitivity to conventional poultry. I had not known this. I went to Pete's Frutique and spent $240 on a bird and did not say a word about it. The second call was to ask if I'd be doing a formal tablescape or just keeping it simple. I said I'd be keeping it simple. She said, "Okay, but maybe a little something. It's Christmas." The third call was to let me know her brother was bringing his new girlfriend and I should set an extra place. I set the extra place. I want to be clear that none of these things individually were enormous. People host holiday dinners. Families gather. Turkeys are expensive. These are ordinary inconveniences of ordinary life, and I am not a woman who collapses under ordinary inconveniences. I have buried a husband. I have rebuilt a life. I have moved furniture alone on a Tuesday, and I have done it without needing anyone to notice. But there is a weight that accumulates. There is a particular kind of invisible labor that women of my generation understand in our bodies before we understand it in our minds. The planning, the tracking, the absorbing of everyone else's preferences and allergies and feelings, while our own needs exist somewhere in a tab that nobody opens. And by the first week of December, I had been carrying that weight for long enough that I could feel something shifting in me. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter than anger. A clarity. The shift happened on a Thursday, completely without drama. I was at the farmer's market, the indoor winter one, on George Street, picking up some preserves and a bag of local oats, and I stopped at a booth I'd walked past a dozen times. A woman about my age was selling handmade things, soaps, dried flower arrangements, small loaves of bread still warm in paper bags. The sign above the booth said Harbor Light, provisions in hand-painted letters. She'd made everything herself. You could see it in the way she talked about each item. Not performing enthusiasm, just quietly proud of the work. I bought a jar of her crabapple jelly and a loaf of her honey oat bread, and we got to talking the way you do at market stalls in small cities when neither of you is in a hurry. Her name was June, too. We laughed at that, and she'd spent 20 years working in hospital administration before she retired and started making things again. She said something that I haven't stopped thinking about. She said, "I spent so long managing other people's emergencies that I forgot what it felt like to make something just for myself." I drove home with that sentence, sitting in the passenger seat. I had planned to spend that evening making my grandmother's shortbread, the batch I make every Christmas for the cookie tray. But when I got home, instead of going straight to the kitchen, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a pad of paper, and I started writing down, for the first time, what Christmas was actually costing me. Not the money, though I added that up too, and it came to just over $1,100 if I counted the turkey, the groceries, the wine, the new tablecloth my daughter had suggested, and the 2 extra sets of dishes I'd had to borrow from my neighbor Linda because I didn't have service for 19. $1,100 that no one had offered to contribute to, or asked about or seemed to consider at all. I also wrote down the time, the trips to the grocery store, the hours of planning. The one night I stayed up past midnight, trying to work out the seating arrangement because 2 members of my son-in-law's family had a conflict I'd been quietly briefed on and wasn't supposed to acknowledge. Then I stopped writing, and I looked out the window at the dark street, and I thought about what Raymond would have said. He would have laughed first, a short, quiet laugh through his nose, and then he would have said, "June, what are you doing?" Not unkindly, just with that particular look he had, like he could see the answer before I'd finished finding it. What was I doing? I'd booked the flight in October, actually. That's the part I haven't told you yet. In October, my friend Sylvie, whom I have known since we were both working at the same dental practice in the 90s, had called to tell me she'd rented a little house outside of Charlottetown for 2 weeks over Christmas and the New Year, and she wanted to know if I'd come for the last week. Just us. Long walks, Bad television, good wine, the kind of cooking that only requires one pot and no one's dietary spreadsheet. I had said yes before she finished asking. I had booked the flight that same afternoon. WestJet, direct from Fredericton to Charlottetown, December 26th, returning January 2nd. And then I had not told my children. I know how that sounds. I've turned it over in my mind many times. I'm not sure I can explain it except to say that the telling felt too complicated in a way I couldn't articulate yet. I knew what would happen. There would be hurt feelings, and then there would be negotiation. And then there would be an adjustment that would somehow require something more from me. And at the end of it, I would still be the one absorbing the difficulty of everyone else's reaction to my own decision. I wasn't ready for that. So I said nothing, and I watched the weeks pass, and I let the planning continue. I told myself I would tell them in November. Then I told myself I would tell them in early December. Then it was the third week of December, and the turkey was sitting in my refrigerator. And I still hadn't said a word. The telling happened, not because I chose it, but because my daughter called on the 23rd to discuss the plan for the morning. Who was arriving, when? Whether I wanted her to come over the night before to help with prep, and did I have enough chairs? I said, I need to tell you something. She said, what's wrong? Nothing is wrong, I told her. I'm spending Christmas with Sylvie on PEI. There was a silence I know how to identify. Not shock. She's not the kind of person who goes silent from shock. It was the silence of someone recalibrating, deciding what register to respond in. What do you mean you're spending Christmas on PEI? I booked a flight in October. I'm leaving the 26th, Mom. Another silence. You're supposed to host Christmas. I know that's what you told everyone, but I didn't agree to it. I said I'd think about it. You bought a turkey. I did buy a turkey. You're welcome to it. I'll leave it in the fridge and you can come pick it up tomorrow and cook it wherever you like. Or you can order it somewhere. There's a lot of good options now. I don't understand what's happening. I told her I understood that, and I was sorry for the timing, and I loved her. I said I'd call on Christmas Day. My son called 11 minutes later. His version of the silence was different, more volatile at the edges. He wanted to know what I was thinking. He said, Sylvie could wait. He said this was the first Christmas we were all going to be together in 4 years. He said he didn't understand why I always did this. I held on to that one for a moment. Why I always did this. I asked him gently what I always did. He didn't have an answer for that. He pivoted. Wasn't I being a little selfish? I said. I made a plan for myself. I kept it to myself longer than I should have, and I'm sorry for that. But making a plan for yourself isn't selfish. It's just a plan. Mom, you didn't ask me if I wanted to host Christmas for 19 people. You told everyone I was hosting Christmas for 19 people. I spent over $1,000 and 6 weeks of planning on a dinner I was voluntold to manage. I love you. I'm going to PEI. He didn't call back that night. My daughter texted at 11 p.m. Fine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I put the phone down and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I watched the end of an old film I'd seen before. Something with Maggie Smith, where she plays a woman who has learned to take up space without apology, and I went to bed at a reasonable hour, and I slept better than I had in months. Here is what happened on Christmas Eve, which I know because Linda next door texted me while I was wrapping Sylvie's gift. My daughter organized a Christmas Eve dinner at a restaurant on King Street. One of the nice ones. Prefix holiday menu, the kind of place you call in September to get a December reservation. She rallied everyone on short notice, which I have to say is genuinely impressive. She is excellent at logistics when she is motivated. The dinner was $460, plus tip. My son's girlfriend, who is an accountant, quietly pointed out to the table that the bill needed to be split, since this was a spontaneous gathering and no one had arranged to cover it. There was some back and forth. There were 2 people at the table who had assumed, based, apparently, on previous family patterns, that someone else would be paying. My son-in-law's credit card covered his family's share and nothing else. My son paid for himself and his girlfriend. The cousins split their portion awkwardly. Brenda, the woman whose connection to the family I still cannot explain, had to step away to call her husband and ask him to transfer money to her account before she could pay for her 2 entrees and a glass of wine. Linda found all of this out because her daughter is friends with one of my daughter's friends, and small cities are exactly what they are. I was on PEI by then, watching the snow come in off the Northumberland Strait from Sylvie's kitchen window, both of us in our wool socks and house slippers, a pot of fish chowder on the stove. My daughter called on Christmas morning. I answered on the 3rd ring. She said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." I said, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." There was a pause, and then she said, "The dinner last night got a little complicated." I said, "I heard a little bit. Are you okay?" "Yeah." Another pause. "It was fine. We're not used to managing it without you." I sat with that for a moment, not triumphantly. There was nothing in me that wanted her to feel bad, but I wanted her to hear what she'd just said. "I know," I told her. "That's kind of the point." She laughed, a little reluctantly. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you about Christmas. I just assumed. I know you did, and I let you assume for too long, and that's on me too. Sylvie's place good?" "It's wonderful. There's a storm coming in tonight. We're going to lose power probably, and I've never been happier about a thing in my life." She laughed again, more genuinely this time. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about her kids opening presents, about her husband burning the scrambled eggs, about how the Christmas music was too loud and her youngest had learned to change the song on the speaker by yelling at it. Ordinary things, good things, the stuff that holds a family together under everything else. Before we hung up, she said, "We should talk in January about how we do things." "Yes," I said. "I'd like that very much." My son called on Boxing Day, while Sylvie and I were walking along the waterfront in Charlottetown in the kind of cold that makes the inside of your nose freeze on the first breath. He apologized for the selfish comment. He said it genuinely, not as a prelude to a counter-argument, which is how I knew it was real. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him what I'd told my daughter, that I had let things go on too long without naming them, and that was something I was going to work on. He said, "I didn't know you were unhappy." I thought about how to answer that. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly. What I was invisible to myself, so busy tending to everyone else's comfort that I had stopped knowing what my own looked like. The bakery, Raymond, the kids, the house on Douglas Avenue repainted alone in October. None of it was victimhood, all of it was choice. But choices made invisibly, without acknowledgement, without a single person asking, "And what do you need?" Those choices accumulate into something that eventually has to move. I wasn't unhappy, I told him. I just needed to remind everyone, including myself, that I'm still here. He said he understood, and I believe he did, at least a little. Understanding comes in degrees. His will deepen as he gets older, especially if he's lucky enough to love someone for a long time and then have to figure out who he is after. I know how that recalibration feels. I've been in it for 5 years. Sylvie and I lost power on Christmas night, just as I'd predicted, and spent 4 hours playing cribbage by candlelight and eating leftover chowder cold from the pot because neither of us wanted to deal with the camp stove. We talked about Raymond, and about her late sister, and about what we wanted the next chapter to look like. She's thinking about teaching a course at the community college, something practical, event planning, or organizational communication. I am thinking about the booth at the winter market and the woman named June who made things with her hands and was quietly proud of the work. I have been thinking about Hartwell's, not about reopening it. I am 64, and my knees have an opinion about standing for 12 hours. But about what it meant to have made something. To have had a thing in the world that bore my name. To have employed people and fed people and been known in a way that had nothing to do with being someone's mother or someone's widow. There's a community kitchen space on Regent Street that rents by the hour. I found it online in November, one of those nights when I should have been sleeping. They have a commercial oven. They do cottage industry licensing. You can sell at farmers markets and to small cafes under a certain revenue threshold without a full commercial permit. I have not told my children about this either, but for different reasons. Not because I'm afraid of their reaction, but because it's mine first. It needs to be mine for a little while before it belongs to anyone else. Raymond would laugh, that short, quiet laugh, and then he'd say, "Finally." In January, I met my daughter for lunch at a cafe on Regent Street. Not my cafe, not yet, but a good one, the kind where they remember what you usually order. We talked for 2 hours, not about Christmas, not about the dinner, but about patterns, about how long I had been the person who absorbs, about how she had grown up watching me do it and had replicated it in her own assumptions without realizing. She said, "I think I need to know more about the bakery, about what things were actually like." I told her some of it. Not all of it. There are things that were between Raymond and me that belonged to us. But some. The good years on Queen Street. The smell of the place at 5 a.m. when the ovens were first lit. The wedding cake we made for a couple who'd met at our counter and came back 6 years later with a photo of their daughter, which Raymond had kept on the wall of the kitchen until the last day. She cried a little. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way she does. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she asked. I thought about what to say. I thought about my mother and her mother and all the women before me who had kept the difficult parts small and tidy and unremarkable because no one had ever suggested they were allowed to take up more space than that. "Because I didn't know I was allowed to," I said. She reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She's practical, my daughter, and she understands that some things don't need a response. They just need to be witnessed. "We paid our own bills," she insisted. I let her. "There is a card on my refrigerator now. Sylvie sent it when she got back to Fredericton. One of those simple ones, just a watercolor of a winter coastline and nothing printed inside. She wrote, 'You have always been the anchor. It's okay to drift a little.' I look at it every morning when I'm pouring my coffee. Black, no sugar. The same as always, except that the kitchen feels different now. Quieter, but not empty. More deliberately mine. I have a meeting at the community kitchen on Regent Street next Thursday. I'm bringing a batch of test recipes, the butter tarts, my grandmother's shortbread, and something new I've been working on. An oat and dark honey loaf I haven't named yet. I haven't told my children. When there's something to tell, I will. On my own timeline, in my own words, the same way I finally learned to make a plan for Christmas. Not small, not invisible, just mine.